Okay, thanks, Sue. So yeah, today's session we'll be starting off first by talking about sort of the background to these sessions that me and Sue have been running. So it'll be on the employability skills. And then Sue will give an overview on the QAA Subject Benchmark Statement and the HCPC Standards of Proficiency. And then Jonathan will give us an overview on quality and why it's important, and examples of quality. And then Sarah will give us an overview of UKAS and laboratory accreditation. To give you some sort of background on today's session, myself and a practice educator, Martin Hicks, did an employability study last year around August time. So this was published in the Biomedical Scientist, the results of a study that we've done around education and employability, to try and find out where some of the gaps lie, especially with students and new graduates. So you can see on this slide here a couple of areas that I've highlighted in green. So we found that the graduates are still coming out with some of the deficiencies during the interview, especially when it comes to quality management system and knowing what quality control is in the lab. So employers noted that they wanted graduates to come out of university knowing about UKAS as well as the role of pathology in patient care. And these were the top skills that were kind of identified as deficient in graduates. So you can see here, we've got interpretation of internal quality control, which has come up. So based on results of this study, we have planned out the IBMS Support Hub sessions for the year, and quality was one of them. And I guess that's just to give you a bit of a background on how this came about. Sue, over to you.
Thanks, Tahmina. I was just requesting control of the screen. I've got control now, so I'll move my slides on myself. So yes, so this is a really timely thing because it links in with the QAA benchmark statement. So I just wanted to explain a little bit about who the QAA are and what the subject benchmark statement is and how we use that at the IBMS in the education and training of our future registrants. So the QAA are the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education in the UK. They're a charity, and what they look after is quality assurance. They're not the regulator, that's just changed to the Office for Students, but they do still have an important role to play in quality assurance processes and making sure that universities are doing what they need to do as far as doing degrees. I can't move it to me, I'm pressing it again. It's not letting me do it because I can control it.
It's saying waiting for Sue to control your screen. Let me just...
I'm trying to control the screen. Okay, it's done it. I think it might have just been thinking. So what's happened for the benchmark statement is that it's been updated. So during 2022, and then it was released in 2023, the updated benchmark statements for several different subject areas have been completed. So these include things like chemistry, biosciences, and biomedical science. So as part of that QAA benchmark statement update, we added in some new subject areas. It's not moving for me, Tahmina. Could you do it? There, thank you. So the updated benchmarking statement, as well as saying biomedical science singular and biomedical sciences plural are different things and what the differences between those degree titles are, the benchmark statement also has some additional information in about the curriculum that we want our students to study while they're at university if they're studying an IBMS accredited biomedical science programme. And what we're doing during this year when we do all of the accreditation events is we are asking all of the universities who have an accredited degree to map to the new benchmark statement so that everybody is doing all the new bits. Could you go to the next slide, please? And if anyone hasn't seen the new statement, the link was on the bottom of that slide. So the two things that we added in as far as the curriculum was concerned for an IBMS accredited degree came from feedback during the consultation. And the feedback said point of care testing or near patient testing was an important area that wasn't included, and then quality. So these are the two things that were inputted, and some of the feedback was from Tahmina and from other council members. So thank you for adding those in. So next bit, please, Tahmina. So under quality, we added in a statement above the subjects that we wanted to cover that's stated here. So it says quality is central to the delivery of all laboratory services, which we know, and it's achieved through incorporating quality systems, quality control, quality assurance in all aspects of what's carried out in the laboratory. So a nice broad statement to start with. And then if you go to the next slide, Tahmina, it has the wording on. So you can make all of this appear. There's 2 more, I think, to appear, or 3 more. So this is what's listed in the updated benchmark statement for what we expect a student who studied an IBMS accredited degree programme to know by the end of the degree. If they do a placement year and they complete the registration training portfolio, that's fine, because they will do that training in the laboratory. But there is now an expectation that all graduates, whether they've done a placement in a clinical lab or not, will have an understanding and appreciation of quality and quality management. So that's interpretation of QC, the importance of both quality assurance and pre-analytical variables, understanding what external quality assessment is, and quality management as outlined in the brackets there. So all of the normal things that you do in the labs that you know will ensure the quality and that you are held accountable for and that you need to report, all of those things in the context of an undergraduate degree should be covered. So people who are mapping to these new standards will be looking at their practical classes and how they can introduce these topics already. Some universities do it already, some universities don't, but this gives them the opportunity to be able to incorporate these things much, much more clearly for the students. Next bit, please. Last one is about UKAS. So I know Sarah's going to talk about UKAS at the end. So again, students, when they finish their degree, should have an understanding of who UKAS are and what ISO standards are and which ones are important to them if they were to work in practice. So I'm going to go on to the HCPC Standards of Proficiency just very briefly. As you know, the standards have been updated. They're coming into effect from the 1st of September this year. And then if you go on to the next bit, please, Tahmina. We've added in the new standards of proficiency related to quality as they were before. So previously, quality was section 2, module 3. That's where it still is. And then if you just go on to the next bit, please, Tahmina, it just says what the new ones are. So the number of SOPs, the total number is very similar to what was in that section and that module before. They're just numbered differently because the numbers of the standards have changed in the updated version. So I've just listed them there for you just to give you an idea, but the number of them is very similar to what was in the previous version of the registration training portfolio. So now I'm going to hand over to Jonathan, who's going to talk a little bit more about what quality is.
Hi everybody. As I say, I'm going to go over a bit about what quality is and in my opinion. So just to sort of start, let's see if we can get the slides moving. Oh, so what does quality mean to yourselves? Is it a car that starts every day? Is it a mobile phone that connects to a network? Struggling to move the slide, sorry.
Oh, do you want me to?
Yeah, could you move them on a bit? Is it a book read which doesn't have any typos in it? Or is it a presentation for that matter? I mean, I'm sure you all spotted those deliberate mistakes that we corrected first off, but they are there for a purpose. So quality's in everything we're looking at. And in the laboratory, quality is what gives our service users complete satisfaction. And quality can be the difference between excellence and disaster. So a quality-led service means hopefully that patients are at minimal risk, whereas if the quality is not there, then that could lead to, at worst case, death of a patient. And we can look at quality as a sort of an aspect of total quality management. So this is a sort of an approach we can look at, which is looking at long-term success through customer satisfaction, and it involves all members of an organization and works on improving processes and product services. Okay, next one, please. So this is like a big sort of overview of total quality management and what we are talking about when we're looking at quality in the NHS and in the laboratory. And there's many factors around that. It's process-centered, customer-focused. Who are our customers? That's the sort of big question. And you know, the simple answer is anybody that is interacting with the laboratory, be it doctors, nurses, porters, patients. And the big key other one there is about looking at continuous improvement. So part of everything that's driving the NHS and ourselves in pathology is making sure that we're looking to continually improve everything we do to make it a safer and leaner process for getting results out to patients. And we need to do that by systematic, strategic approaches, looking at our processes as well. We'll go to the next slide, thanks, Tahmina. So quality management. So quality in the lab starts with a quality management system. So obviously Sue mentioned at the start and Tahmina about how the big understanding about what is a quality management system. So it's nothing special really. It is simply the processes that are in place to make sure we manage everything we do to deliver a product, i.e. a result, that meets the needs of the service users, customers, and is a quality result. Now, in pathology, when I talk about quality management, I'm usually talking about a system. So, for example, my laboratory, we use QPulse, but there's other systems out there, which is a document management system. One place where we can try and control as much of what's going on in the laboratory as possible. Thanks. This is where I now regret putting lots of animation in for Tahmina to work through. So when we look at it all overall, quality management is looking at your processes, procedures, taking into account regulatory body considerations, whether that's UKAS, health and safety executive, more focused in the microbiology areas and containment level 3 facilities, human tissue authority in sort of histology, mortuary, and MHRA for transfusion related areas. So these all need to be considered as part of quality management and building our quality management system to fit in with the guidance or regulations in their system. And this group of people here is about collaborative working, talking together to try and improve what we're doing, to ultimately reduce waste and build in continuous improvement in the system. Okay. So what we can do is break down quality as we see it within the laboratory. So some of this is stolen from ISO 15189. So what we can do is look at quality in the laboratory broken down into our pre-examination processes. Now we can often forget about a lot of this because this is everything that happens before it sort of crosses the threshold into the main laboratory you work in. So it's about sample collection, the transport of the samples, and any receipt and handling in specimen reception. Then we move on to what we would probably traditionally consider to be the quality area, which is the examination processes. So this is what's happening in the laboratory itself, beginning early on with validation, verification of tests that we're performing, measurement uncertainty, that's a dirty word, but I'm sure we all know a bit more about what measurement uncertainty is now. Looking at SOPs, internal quality control, external quality assurance to make sure the results are correct. Moving through to the end where we start talking about post-examination processes. So this is the actual reporting of results, including review, any amended results reports and critical result processes. By that, what do we do with the results? If there's a phone criteria, and how do we notify our users? So ultimately in the lab, who is responsible for quality? Short answer, everybody. It's everybody's job to make sure that quality in the laboratory is maintained. And how do we do that? We make sure everybody is trained and competent. We're putting standardized protocols in place. So for any processes, so any task or job you're going to do in the laboratory, you should have a documented record of how you're exactly going to do that from start to finish, including reporting. For any processes where there is possibility, you can do quality control, internal quality control, external quality control. We're going to go into a little bit of that just in the next few slides. We're going to make sure any equipment we used is maintained. We're going to make sure any reagents are managed appropriately so they're not on board or they're made up correctly, and there's documentation everywhere. So all of this building into our quality management system. So just to look at, so obviously very early on it was mentioned about quality control. Just to sort of give an example, so this is, I've stolen this from a presentation I did within my own laboratory just to try and help people understand quality control and the requirements under ISO 15189 about reference ranges, because I'm sure we've all had a look. I appreciate some people are from histo background and or microbiology and may not have dealt with sort of more numeric QC. So this is more of a blood sciences or serology style example. But just to give an example, say manufacturers, when they supply a quality control material, are very generous with the reference ranges they give. So what an example here is basically they're as wide as the Grand Canyon, that they are absolutely enormous, and it's very unlikely that you will ever fail an IQC based on a manufacturer's range. And I'm a UKAS assessor, and I go into laboratories and look, and still to this day can see places where they're still operating on these ranges. So if we go to the next slide, what you actually find when I go into a laboratory is I'll look at their IQC graphs and see that the QC is moving around a level which is so much tighter, and I can barely look at these pictures. I can't stand people crawling through mines and caves like this. It's terrible, but very, very tight. And if we go to the next slide, this gives an example. So this is an erythrocyte sedimentation rate, quality control. This was a high value. So this is just the scale on the side is millimeters per hour. And this was the QC performance. The manufacturer range right at the top and bottom showing how wide it was. The mean was around 65. And what we've demonstrated is when we calculated our own standard deviation from the mean based on data and worked out what 1, 2, and 3 standard deviations were, you can see that we never once went really close to the manufacturer range. So if we operated on that, we'd say, oh, our QC is in range, but it was never going to fail. And what we as UKAS assessors expect now is that the laboratory has adjusted the range to an acceptable range. So what I would suggest, so possibly based on Westguard, but it's as a UKAS assessor, we're not there to tell you what to do, but you've got to come up with an acceptable approach. So if it was, say, your 2 standard deviations would be a warning. So you go, oh, something may be wrong there. 3 standard deviations is usually a stop. There's something seriously wrong and we need to look at it. So this here is just showing that the QC there would be much better controlled under a 2 standard deviation route. You'd still have infrequent failures, and you would expect 1 in 20 to be out just through random chance and error. And that is pretty much what you're looking at here. Thinking of external quality assurance, so the internal quality assurance obviously is we are given values or we calculate values, so we know what the result is going to be. The difference with external quality assurance schemes, for example, NEQAS, is that we are sent samples. We know what we need to test them for, but we have no idea what the correct result is. So it's blind testing. So we get sent the samples, we process them as normal patient samples. We don't process them 5 times and take an average. We treat them exactly as we treat every other patient sample that would come in for that test. And then we report the result back to the scheme. And then what the scheme will do is assess these results against all of the returns brought in, and then we will get a report saying whether we're in or out of consensus and a performance score. And depending on the scheme, some may have groups. So for example, in blood sciences, you may have 2 groups depending on instruments used, because sometimes targets are different. But what happens is they'll then report back any poor performance highlighted. And then as part of our quality management scheme, we'll be expected to investigate poor performance. And then EQA schemes, if you get 3 performances which are rated as poor, then you get what we call a PUP, a persistent underperformance letter, which means we have to report back to the EQA scheme why we are underperforming and what we're doing about it. And that should all be documented in your quality management scheme. I think the other thing to mention is that staff are the key to quality. Even when you think about what we've talked about at the very start about training, HCPC registration, IBMS portfolios, things like that, is making sure we're assuring ourselves that people understand the processes and what they need to do in the laboratory at the start. And it's basically vital to ensure that staff are well trained initially. And competence assessment must be undertaken, which is separate. So training is one thing, and then competence assessment after training to ensure that all the training given is embedded and the person understands what they're doing. And all staff must be aware of the expectations for quality. And obviously in quality, what we're talking about is things will go wrong. We can't prevent everything going wrong, but what we need is a culture where anything that goes wrong is highlighted. So we need to highlight any issues. These incidents need to be logged, whether they're internally or externally. For example, if things can have affected patient care, you may have a process where an external report's done and it may go through your trust process. Other things may be internal, where some things occurred, but nothing has gone out incorrectly or anything, but we need to address what's gone wrong. And you can do that through, so for example, through QPulse, through incident module or your corrective action, preventive action. And you'll have a template probably to follow for non-conformity, where you give details of what the non-conformance is, you highlight any immediate corrective actions that were taken at the time, and then look at preventive actions and any corrective actions to ensure that the incident doesn't happen again. Determining root cause is pretty tricky, really, a lot of the time, to try and find a singular root cause, and taking into account human factors as well. So, but this is the bit that builds to make sure that we're improving things all the time. And through incident reporting is where we get continual improvement, because we'll find problems in the system and improve them. And why do we do all this? Well, it's for them, it's for the patients. So everything pathology does and the NHS does is to try and improve patient care. So it's patients first for everything we do. So why quality is important? It's getting it right first time. It's making sure that the right result goes out to the right patient at the right time, or the right unit of blood's given, or the right diagnosis off a histopathology slide. It's that. And to sort of link this in, so there's been a national program called Getting It Right First Time, and it was designed to improve treatment and care of patients through an in-depth review of all these services, and they did benchmarking. And it wasn't just pathology, they went through all sorts, but our pathology report was produced in September 2021. Go to the next slide, thanks. And what the GIRF, as we call it, the GIRF came through was a clean framework. So what they're talking about is clean in, so test appropriate, samples collected and labeled and stabilized and to deliver to the lab on time. That's in line with UKAS ISO standards. Clean through, making sure that there's minimum errors in the lab, processing results in a clinically relevant time frame, and improving lab oversight of point of care, which was mentioned earlier as well. And then the clean out, which is looking at results that describe normality for the patient, that actually results that actually help define next actions for the patient and visible when needed. So that's building in turnaround time. I'm sure we've all heard turnaround times, and it's a big pressure to make sure that all our results are coming out on time. That's it. So the key three foundations underpinning this clean framework by GIRF: foundation 1, quality. Foundation 2 is data and digital delivery, and then 3, service delivery. But there's quality, it's everywhere, it's in everything. There's an internal running joke, I would say, where I work, where I'm quality manager, and anything always ends up on my desk because they'll just go, well, it involves quality. And the thing is, it does, but not everything, but you know, there we go. So it's embedded in everything and must be something you consider for everything. And there's a link there just if anyone wants to have a look into GIRFT, and that's the link where you can find all the reports and read a lot more detail about what the reporting was. Thanks. But the sort of the big thing for me for this talk today is about learning from mistakes. So I've stolen this off the internet from the World Health Organization from last year, and I thought it fit really well with regards to laboratory working, basically saying that, yes, to err is human, we all know that one, and to forgiveness divine, but this one is expecting flawless performance from human beings working in complex, high-stress environments is unrealistic, and that's laboratory working. So what we do need to do is make sure that what people are working in is an environment where there's what's called psychological safety, which means that you have the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. An open and honest culture in the NHS is vital. And what we've got to realize is mistakes are important to learn from and highlight defects in the system and aid to continual improvement. So that is my take home, is that we always must have this psychological safety to say that we all do things wrong, I do things wrong, but we need to be open and honest about it as part of quality control, quality management, so that we can put measures in place to correct that and make sure we learn from them. And that's me, thank you.
Hi, I think I'm going to be taking over the next bit. Let me just see if I can take control. Okay. I think I'm going the wrong way. Could you put it back to the beginning? Sorry. There you go, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a bit about UKAS and what UKAS is and who it accredits, etc. So pathology covers numerous departments. Here at Royal Cornwall Hospital, we have a blood sciences department, and this covers blood transfusion, haematology and clinical chemistry, both manual and automated. Microbiology and virology department, histology, cytology in the mortuary, andrology and immunology. So they're all under our UKAS number. So the next one. Okay, so what is UKAS? UKAS is the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. So basically it's our accreditation body for pathology. It comes in as it's a non-profit private company, and it comes in and just makes sure that we are actually doing what we say we're doing, and we're doing it at quality processes and procedures. It's a self-financing company, and it charges fees to conformity assessment bodies, so that's hospitals, labs, etc., to cover their operational costs and other expenditures. So it doesn't get anything from the government or anything, it all comes from us. So who does UCAS accredit? So as I said, it is appointed by the government to assess organisations. This could be medical labs such as pathology, forensic labs, engineering plants, food labs, manufacturing plants. So it's not just us here at the NHS, it's other departments as well. So medical labs require accreditation to show the following. So it shows it's got the confidence that we are actually have got the quality standards in pathology department. So we are actually doing quality work. We have trust for our public just to help promote quality performance, both regulatory and non-regulatory performances, and insurance, the accreditation assessment, and verify that they are met, and we are working towards them. So Jonathan mentioned it a couple of times in his talk. We worked to standards called ISO 15189. There was one 2012 version, but it's actually just been updated this year, and we're still working towards that one. But it's approximately 32 pages with about 101 clauses, so it's not a small piece of work. And when UCAS come in, as Jonathan knows, we have to show that we meet every single requirement in them clauses to show that we're UKAS accredited. In the old accreditation system, which was called CPA, we were accredited as a department, so the whole department was accredited. In this UKAS accreditation, they accredit each test. So if you've got a numerous test, they will look at each separate test just to make sure that you're accredited and you're meeting the standards for each thing. You could be accredited on some tests, but not on others. And then what you'd have to do is actually tell your users which tests are accredited and which aren't, which is another one of their clauses in the 15189. So these standards cover numerous things. So they ensure the efficiency and validity of processes, they confirm the accuracy of the measurements that we do, create assurance, demonstrate technical competence, prove impartiality, deliver confidence, gain commercial advantages, and increase international acceptance for import and export. I'm just going to give you one little example. I said the one I picked was the quality policy. So what each department has to write a quality policy, and it has to then match to the clauses in the 15189. So this one is 4.1.2.3 quality policy. So the lab management shall ensure that lab services, including appropriate advisory interpretive services, meet the needs of patients and those in using the lab services. Now that does sound quite jargon, and it's interpreted differently by different people, but as long as you actually meet the clauses and you can say why you've met the clause and how you've met the clause, the UKAS assessors are normally pretty happy to assess that. Sometimes you do have to argue, not that I'm saying that we do all the time, Jonathan. So the quality policy, is it appropriate to the purpose of the organisation? Does it include a commitment to good professional practice, examinations that are fit for attended use, compliance with requirements of this international standards, and continual improvement of the quality of lab services? And does it provide a framework for establishing and reviewing quality objectives? Is it communicated and understood within the organisation? So that is basically what the clause says, and I've given you, hopefully it'll open. No, it's not going to open. I don't know if, Tahmina, I don't know if you can open it for me. No, doesn't look like it's going to open, does it?
No, if I double click, it moves to the next slide, Sarah.
Okay, that's fine, sorry. So that was to show you an example of the quality policy that we have here at Royal Cornwall, and it is UKAS accredited, and they're happy with it, and it meets all the clauses. If necessary, I'm more than happy to send it out so you can have a look at it. But that was just to show you how we meet the standards of the ISO 15189. Next one. So, and it also says about people understanding and acknowledging. So we use QPulse, as Jonathan said that he uses as well. So basically this is where the document is stored. So you look under here, and once you've read it, you find your name on the distribution list and you click acknowledge. So when the UKAS assessment people come in, they can see exactly who's acknowledged it, when they've acknowledged it, and hopefully follow exactly what this says in the policy. So why do we have UKAS accreditation? Basically, it's just to reduce the risk. Employing services of UKAS accredited lab means choosing a technically competent lab, minimising the risk of producing or supplying a faulty product. As Jonathan said, we are always training and competency assessing our staff just to make sure that they're doing exactly what the SOPs, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they were getting it right first time, so that patient is getting the right result at the right time. But saying that, ISO 159 is not mandatory, so you don't have to go through ISO and get accredited, but it is highly recommended people do like to know that the labs that they're using are UCAS accredited. So that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to check the Q&As.
It's been really quiet, Tahmina. Jim and I have fielded what's come in, but the Q&As have been quite quiet today. So shall I just explain the QR code while we ask if anybody's got any questions? If there is anything you'd like to ask that you haven't yet, if you want to type it into the Q&A, if you go on the bottom bar of your screen, you'll see the 2 speech bubbles that say Q&A. If you type any questions into there, we can ask Jonathan and Sarah if they can answer those while we're in the session. And the QR code, which is on this last slide, is for an evaluation survey for the Support Hub today. So if you wouldn't mind, if you have a phone, a smartphone that can use the QR code, you can scan that and you can answer the survey on your phone. If you don't have a smartphone, we can send the link to the survey to go out afterwards so that people can do that, or pop it in the chat or the Q&A so people can do it. So if you could let us know what you think of the webinar that we've done today, and then we can use your information. Any questions you've not had the opportunity to ask, you can also ask. There's a box for you to add in there. So thank you very much, Jonathan and Sarah, for your slides and for your explanations, and to Tahmina for very ably moving everybody on. He's the only person who had control. Thank you very much. So I can see a couple of questions have come in. So shall we have a look at those questions, and people can be thinking and typing in. We've got a few minutes to answer questions today. We've got plenty of time, which is brilliant. So shall we have a look at what's coming in? I can see there's 3.
Do you want me to read them out like we did last time, Sue? And then
that would be great.
The first one I've got is from Neil Evans. He's asking who assesses UKAS.
This is a difficult one. UKAS assess themselves, unfortunately. So they follow their own processes, and then they pass it on to us to do in the department. UKAS
do get internationally assessed, so because they're part of this international thing, they do get and you have to forgive me, I've forgotten who it is that could, so they do get internationally assessed based on the standard for being able to assess standards almost. So they are assessed externally because they've been assessed recently and were highlighted as the one of the findings where, for example, where Sarah rightly pointed out that if you are accredited for a full blood count in hematology but not an ESR, what they were saying is we need to be able to indicate on our reports what is and isn't accredited. And this came out saying that we now need to say for everything what we are accredited for and are not accredited for, which came from their accreditation. There's a lot of word accreditation in this, but that's how it all sort of worked out. And they passed that down to us kindly. And most of us have said that we can't do it at the minute. But yeah, there is international accreditation of UKAS, so they do get the same sort of kicking we get.
Thank you, Jonathan. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, that's okay.
So the next question from Penny is, do you have any recommended resources that you can direct students to? Quality.
I think the one I would say is about getting hold of the ISO standard as a starter for 10. Every laboratory should have it, and especially the new 2022 version, which is out now. It's expensive to buy, but every laboratory will need it who's accredited. And just to sit and read through that, your poor quality manager will be doing a gap analysis on it, as is required by UKAS. Yeah, there's that wonderful book as well, but it's unfortunately maybe a bit out of date now to, you know, but your quality manager should be doing a gap analysis based on the new standard to which has to be submitted to UKAS. So we are able to, everybody by the end of next year will have to have moved on to the new 15189 2022, whereas at the minute our assessment visits for this year can be, it's our choice. So we could be assessed against the 2022 standard if we want, but if we don't, we can maintain 2012.
Yeah, we do actually have 3 years to move over to
Yeah.
the 2022 standards. But yes, as Jonathan said, we do have to do a gap analysis just to see where we are. And also just to reiterate, the ISO standards are copyright, so you're not really allowed to go and photocopy them. So obviously you'd have to borrow them off your quality manager or your department and then give them back, because you're not even allowed to put them on QPulse. So.
Thank you. And
sorry,
Deborah,
Tahmina, I'll just say one thing is, if everybody, I feel like I'm banging the UKAS drum here. I only technically assess part-time, but their website has got lots of information on about quality. It's obviously got a lot of, so we're talking about 15189, the standard, but they've got other technical documents on there which are relevant to departments, and there's a lot of resources on the actual ucas.com website I would recommend reading as well.
Thanks,
Thank
Jonathan.
you.
I was going to say something, Tahmina, linked to that actually, that UKAS do have lots of resources which are open access. If you were asking Penny from a university point of view, you will have your employees liaison group, so you can talk to your practitioner colleagues and ask them about resources for students particularly. So if you're thinking about bringing them into your practical classes, I would talk to your local practitioners that you'll be having regular meetings with anyway, because you need to do that to be accredited, so that you can talk to them about what resources do they use, what can they point you to. But there are some open access ones, aren't there, Jonathan, like you say, on UKAS and other websites that you can find quite easily.
Yeah, following on from that, Deborah has put in the chat as well that there's lots of resources on quality on the IBMS website, and you can check out the Biomedical Scientist magazine for the articles as well. So there's quite a few in there. Next question, how do you enable a culture of learning from mistakes in the lab?
That's a difficult one. I think, again, it's about this psychological safety thing. I think we've all probably worked somewhere in a time where if you make a mistake, the sort of nobody intentionally goes out to make a mistake. And I think that's very important. And if you have a culture where you're scared to report something you've done wrong, that causes the issue. And so having this open environment where I would hate for someone to think that they couldn't come to me and say, look, I've made this mistake. The first thing's going to be, right, what is it? Let's get it sorted. And, thanks very much for coming to us. Then let's work through the process to see, so why did that go wrong? And I think it's trying to get that part embedded first, to say that you've got to have people who are willing to just go, oh, look, I made a mistake. Immediately, as soon as they find it, report it. Encourage to report, support it through the process, and always try and be aware that the vast majority of the time, mistakes are due to process, not individuals. No one is intentionally going out to make a mistake, and we need to improve the process for them so that the mistake doesn't happen again, and if it's not them, for other staff. So just trying to build that culture is the way I try and go about it. I'm not saying that it's perfect throughout where I work in my trust, but the NHS mandate to be open and honest in the culture has to be followed.
Thank you, Jonathan. Comment from Jacqueline and a question. Thank you for a really interesting presentation. Have you got any career tips for aspiring quality managers?
For myself, I've been in the NHS for 21 years now. I started off as a BMS in histology, and then I moved up into being the departmental quality lead. So that was looking after all the accreditation, SOPs, QMS for the department. And then I moved down to Cornwall, and I'm now the quality manager for pathology. So I look after 5 labs and the mortuary. So my recommendation is start off in the department quality lead, do any quality courses that you can, like the IBMS do a quality management course, which I've completed, and I actually tutor on that as well. And any quality course, an MSc or anything like that you want to get involved in, go on to Congress and go to presentations, and just get involved, really. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Sarah. Question from Mansoor. How do UKAS make sure its standards are continuously in practice? Because we notice labs prepare for UKAS visits, but most of the standards are not met as soon as the visit has successfully ended.
I want names. No, I think a lot of people, anyone who can remember CPA, which is Clinical Pathology Accreditation, they came out once every 4 years. So I very much think this was exactly what happened. So there'd be 3 months of real hard work, get up to standard, and then for the next 3 years, it would just tail off. Yeah. And then suddenly we're up again. So yeah, whereas UKAS, it's a lot harder. I'm not saying it isn't happening, but because you know they're coming annually or should be coming every year, the standard can't slip as far. I totally appreciate that a lot of this stuff is very difficult to maintain, but here to deliver the UKAS, it's a sampling exercise. So there may be conformity that is present in the lab, but just because as a UKAS assessor, we haven't seen it, the responsibility still lies with the organization to put corrective actions in. So that's the sort of get out clause of UKAS, is that on the day, and I know, for example, if currently I get sent, so someone will go, I need to see a competency assessment before I turn up on site. So they're going to send me, you're not going to send me a competency assessment that's half completed. You're going to send me your perfect competency assessment because you know that's what I'm going to look at. So then I'll come on site and I'll go, what about them? Because I know you'll have sent me the best stuff. So it's almost, as quality managers, it's almost like a game. It's a game of chess, trying to make sure we're putting our best face forward, but equally being open and honest with UKAS as well, because it's a collaborative approach. Don't look at it as a competition. It's a collaborative approach, and I love arguing with UKAS assessors because some will, you've got to remember that some will put a personal slant on what they think, and that's not, where does it say that in the standard? That's what I would say. You're telling me I have to do this. You show me in the standard where it says that. So collaborative approach to improvement, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, and another thing for me is continuously monitoring what you're doing. So you're looking at your CAPAs and your documents and your audits in any instance, etc. So you're continually monitoring that, seeing there's any trends, putting instance into practice if there is. And as you said, you know, it's not like it was CPA days where you could literally not do anything for 2 or 3 years. Do everything in the last 3 months. With UKAS, you are continually doing it every month until they're back on site in November, and then they'll find something else that they didn't find last year, so you'd have to change that, and then the next year they'll have to start finding something else. So they're always going to find something, and for me as a quality manager, I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that they find things that need to be improved. If you've got nothing to improve, I don't know, is that a quality service if you're not continuously improving? I don't know. So that's my slant on it.
Thank you, Jonathan and Sarah. I've got a question from Babin. Has there ever been any sort of cost-benefit analysis performed on Ucas accreditation? So if a lab opts out of Ucas accreditation, does that actually result in a loss of business?
I would suggest not. It's a difficult one because UCAS is not cheap. We all know, all us quality managers and anyone who holds a budget realizes how expensive it can be, running up towards, I mean, I think ours is, you know, it's not at 100,000 a year, but it's not probably far off. And Sarah, with additional things like andrology, and that adds cost in. But when you look at it from an NHS perspective of budget for a trust, getting the assurance of that quality is beneficial for the trust, for the chief executive. And although ISO accreditation is not mandated, NHS England are basically now saying you need to be ISO accredited, you need to be UKAS assessed and ISO accredited. It's as part of the, in England anyway, it's part of the pathology quality assurance dashboard. One of the questions on that, which we have to complete, is is the laboratory UKAS accredited? Are your tests accredited? How many of your tests are out with the scope? And these are all questions. So although it's not mandated, there is a massive drive now. So.
And also for me, I think if we do a lot of trials here at Royal Cornwall, so if we're not UKAS accredited, we wouldn't get that money for the trials to actually be in them trials. And obviously sometimes we get things from other hospitals. Again, if we're not UKAS accredited, we wouldn't be able to do that. We wouldn't be able to test for other hospitals either. So there is some cost benefits there as well.
Yeah. So as someone who works in a site which refers more work than we pull in, if I was going to refer to Sarah's hospital, the first question I would do is look to see if the test I need to refer is on the UKAS scope of accreditation. And if it's not in Sarah's scope, I will look elsewhere. And it's only if there's nowhere else, I'll potentially go back, because we have to pick a quality assured service. And Sarah can tell me as much as she wants that the test is under that guise and will be at the same level. But part of our quality management of my trust is that we will reference to a UKAS accredited laboratory as that sign of the standard of the laboratory.
Thank you, Jonathan. We'll just squeeze in a couple more questions, just conscious of the time. So someone's asking whether you do any training for quality or accreditation abroad. Is there anything available?
Again, UKAS is the place I would go. They do seminars which are openly available, and I appreciate we've been talking quite a lot about UK-based stuff here, and I appreciate that there's scope elsewhere. So UKAS do tend to think a bit, although they are the UK accreditation scheme, they do think a bit more internationally. So because they do assessments at other in other countries as well, but nothing that I know, to be honest.
Thanks, Jonathan. Question from Carly. Would the lab need to state that a test was accredited on the result report, or is it enough to put in the pathology handbook?
Can't hear you now, Sarah. It's a hot potato, that one, I think, is the short answer though, isn't it?
Yeah, can you hear me or not?
Yeah, we can now.
Yeah, we can, excellent. As I said, we've just had a finding from our UKAS, because our LIMS system is actually really old, so we're not able to put the accreditation on each report. And this is a new thing that they do want us to put that at the end of every report, what tests are accredited and what tests aren't accredited. And they are actually being quite hot on that at the moment. I don't know if you look at that when you go on site, Jonathan?
So this is the thing I was alluding to before, where theoretically we should have that on. It came out as a new document, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Gen 6, thank you. So if you go on the UKAS website, you can find this Gen 6 document, which indicates this. Fortunately, my laboratory as well is sitting on a 30-plus-year-old LIMS system. So we've argued that we can't do it, but we'll need to consider it when we move to our new system in October time. Yeah. But I've argued that the report has to be clear, and sticking 15 comments on a chemistry report for every analyte to say, oh, sodium's accredited, this is accredited, this is accredited, you can lose the one that isn't accredited in that. But UKAS are being a bit cool on, I mean, I wouldn't give a finding on that, because usually it's more the assessment manager, where us as UKAS assessors and the UKAS managers are probably arguing the toss between ourselves about how we expect people to go about this. So it has definitely been raised in my visits, and we have said that obviously this is how we are hoping to address it via this new LIMS system. But yeah, theoretically, this should be on the reports.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, I have to say. I mean, obviously, if the clinician wants to know if it's accredited, they can always ask us, or they can go on the UKAS website and have a look. It's also on our test database, so they can go on there. But yeah, it's a difficult one.
And in answer to the question, currently in my laboratory, they're in the handbook.
Yeah. As is on our website.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. I think we'll squeeze one more in. Okay, so there is a question here. Why do UKAS not tell us what to do? Why do we all have to play these mind reading games with the assessors?
Who knows, eh?
Jonathan, you can answer that one.
Yeah, shall I? So it's a difficult one. It's because they're not an advisory service, and the problem is that it doesn't, the standard when, so for example, Sarah's nice example of the quality policy, the standard says some text, but what UKAS is basically saying is, if I was to say we as UKAS are not prescribing exactly what you do, and we're not going to supply you with a template for your quality policy because that may not fit your organization. So it'll say, you know, so it's like in the standard, it says the laboratory shall, denoting you must have this, blah, 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 which indicates this and this, but how you then build that should be bespoke to your organization. And funnily enough, things like SOPs, so the 2012 standard was fairly prescriptive, saying, you know, as a bare minimum, your SOPs, your documentation should include, and then they had like A to I or something of like, you know, performance characteristics, measurement, and so and a list, so you could build an SOP based on that. Whereas the new standard now has got rid of that, and you don't have to have it like that. So I think the reason they don't advise, or I wouldn't advise as such, is because one size doesn't fit all. Whereas HTA or HSE, these regulatory bodies who you can't stop coming in, they can come in any time and potentially close you down as well if they're not happy with performance. They can advise, and they do. So HTA are amazing because they'll give you templates for everything. So, oh, you need this body, you haven't got an appropriate body release form, for example, for a mortuary. There's a template on our website. And if you follow that, you will then comply with the regulations. So it's a sort of that sort of difference. But as a UKAS assessor, you're not allowed to advise, but you can say, I have seen somewhere else a different approach. And you'll probably find that sort of wording if you ever talk to your UKAS assessors who are trying to give you possibly a nudge in the right direction if you're really not sure how you can address a finding.
Thank you, Jonathan. So that brings us to the end of the session. So if there's any questions, I can see there are a few still, but we haven't got around to answering. But like Sue said at the beginning, we will answer these and send them out in a frequently asked questions format. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you, Jonathan and Sarah, for helping out with this session as well, and to everyone who's contributed.